We are now recording and starting our next conversations with pastors. Today, I am with Dr. Amy Downey. I've known Amy for years, and we'll talk some about that. But Amy directs, and I don't even know what your title is, president of DpMinistries. We're going to spend some time talking about what Tzedakah does, Amy's testimony, and then also how that it can be a tool for the folks in our network of pastors, and even beyond that for churches, regardless of size and those kinds of things. So I'm going to give Amy a second to just introduce herself. Will you just share a little bit about your background, your bio, truthfully, to kind of share with us how God would take an old country girl from Texas and move her to the place that He's moved you, the opportunities He's given you, and to the place that today He's brought you as far away as New York City to do the ministry that you do. So, Amy, we're glad you're here with us today. Please just share with us what's on your heart, and we'll work our way through some of this today.
Well, Dennis, it's actually New York State, but it's close enough to New York City that it's okay. But, I am a good old Texas girl, and my parents were both born, well, Mama was born and raised near Abilene. So that is about as New York, as Texas as you can get. And, but I was born in New Mexico. Daddy went to Bible college in Kentucky, and he did most of his pastoring in West Texas, which I know you know a lot about. And I graduated in Oklahoma, which I know you know a lot about. Don't do your Sooner call. And but I was called, and I surrendered my missions call to Jewish people, which I know we'll talk a lot more about. And when I was 29 years old, a few years after we met in Conroe, Texas, and I moved to New York, and I've been in Jewish missions now for 23 years, which if anybody's doing the math, that means I'm 53. And so, but how did a good old Texas girl who was born in New Mexico, lived in Kentucky, graduated Oklahoma, how did I get here? That's a long story, which we don't have time for. But I didn't want to be a missionary because, my understanding of missions was, based on Lottie Moon, which meant being a single girl, starving to death, and having the Southern Baptist name an offering after you, because they felt guilty for letting you die. And but I had no choice. And the Jewish people is because of a 6th grade reading teacher named Ketta Casey, who had us to read the Diary of Anne Frank, and a Baptist pastor daddy who preached the entirety of Romans 1:16, which includes those 4 words that a lot of people skip, which says to the Jew first. And so between Miss Casey and Daddy and the Lord, and going to Southwestern Seminary, and even though I skipped all those chapels that had missionaries, and Jerry Rankin, he was in charge of the IMB when I was at seminary, I just could not run from the mission call. And finally, at 29, I finally said, okay, God, I'll go. And when I said, I'll go, God put all those factors together, and I knew immediately it was to the Jewish people. And there's a lot more to my mission story than what I'm able to share in the few minutes I have. But when I said I'll go, I knew it was to the Jewish people.
Yeah. Well, and it, just as far as a little background, there's not a nationality or a background of Judaism in your family directly?
No.
Well, and go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you looked at me, you would know I was Scotch-Irish. So.
Well, and it's amazing how God works in those things, taking us places we never imagined, doing things we never thought.
No.
Today, growing up in Oklahoma, when you say in Oklahoma you're going to the city, no matter where you are in the state, there's only one city.
Oklahoma City.
So when I say New York City, that you could live in Albany, and I'm still thinking, of New York City. So living there, not far out of actual New York City.
Right.
How long have you been up there?
This time, 18 months.
Just a really short kind of thing, and I don't know if I had this on my list. You lived in New York City before.
Right.
Uh,
I lived in New York City, the city, before from 2000, January of 2000 to the end of 2002.
and so you were there in 9/11.
Right.
And so, as a firsthand experience of that, it helps to give you some of us a little better picture of who you are. You also have a background in teaching.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your education, your background, your history, those kinds of things.
Well, I have an undergrad from East Texas Baptist University, so I understand East Texas. I have 2 degrees from Southwestern. I have Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. I have an MA in communication and I have an MA in theology. And then I got my PhD in theology and apologetics from Liberty University. And when I tell people, don't be impressed, that just means I'm in debt. And so
Now, and Amy, help me with this. You kind of helped to break ground at Liberty with
I did.
share, kind of tell me what that looked like.
Well, I was the first female to get my PhD in theology and apologetics from Liberty. And it was a blessing. I got to study under Gary Habermas, who is known as one of probably the 3 best Christian apologists, excuse me, in the world.
Okay.
And so,
Well, and because a large the circle of what we do with our ministry encompasses way more than just Southern Baptist folks. We have right now we have about 10 different Baptist distinctives that are part of who we are. And then when this is published, it'll go to anybody that wants to follow up and do with it. So I think it's good to know. Sometimes when you hear about people or hear about ministries and to know a little bit of a background, to at least give some veracity to who they are, to know that this is not just somebody that decided to go do something, but doesn't have a good foundation. And so you started, we're going to let you talk about just a minute about Tzedakah. Help us to understand a little bit about the name, the concept, the organization, and then we'll kind of break down and get into a little bit about what you do.
well, Zadok is a Hebrew word which means righteous. And if we remember in Isaiah 64, Isaiah writes that our righteousness is as filthy rags before God. And I took the word righteousness, which is tzedakah in Hebrew, and to understand that our absolute best is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And Jewish people today are trying to achieve their, for lack of a better word, their salvation. And they wouldn't see it as salvation, but we'll use Christianese here. Their salvation by doing good deeds, by doing, I'm going to use a Hebrew word for a second, but by doing mitzvahs, by doing good deeds. That's what mitzvahs mean. By giving to charity, by being good, by donating to hospitals, to civic centers, to symphony centers. If you live in the Dallas area, the Meyerson Symphony Center, that kind of thing. I lived in Dallas for a long time. They try to do good things to earn their way to heaven. The former mayor of New York said that Mike Bloomberg said, I've done so many good things. And by the way, he's an atheist. That if there is a God, I'm just going to walk into heaven and say, hey, I've done so many good things. I'm not going to even stop and talk to you. I'm just walking right in. That's his attitude because I've done so many good deeds. But Isaiah wrote that our righteousness is as filthy rags before God. Yeah. And so we cannot do enough good deeds to earn our way to heaven. So tzedakah is the idea that we need to show them that we need a personal relationship with God. And if I,
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, because when we began to look at the sinfulness of humanity, it's not based upon our heritage, it's not based upon our ethnicity, it's not based upon, it's just the nature of fallen man. And my take on that, I mean, you can help me with that, is sometimes as a Gentile, as the Bible explains to us, we perceive somehow a different scenario or even a different concept for how God deals with the Jewish people rather than the way he does with Gentiles. And
Right.
I don't want to get off into, some of those other things, but I think it's important that we understand, and especially the fact that a Jewish person is just as lost as anybody. Matter of fact, it's almost in my mind even a sadder state, if that could be possible, because of God's love and God's plan historically for them through the ages. So, but anyway, tzedakah is a incorporation.
It is. It's a 501c3.
And so any giving to that is tax deductible.
It is.
We'll talk about some of that as we go. So tell me, and you live again in the New York City metropolitan area.
Right. We live about 45 miles west of the city.
So
I do that for a couple of different reasons.
Okay, I was going to say, why are you there, not Dallas or Kentucky or Abilene or Houston?
A couple of different reasons. Number one, I'll be honest, it's cheaper to live outside of New York City than it is to live in New York City, as you can well imagine. And number two, we have two primary focal points as a ministry. Our number one focal point, and we'll talk more about this later, is our vision statement is to equip his church to reach his people. And we'll talk more about that in a lot more depth later. Our second primary focal point is there are hundreds of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jewish people living in New York City, but they're moving outside of New York City, and they're moving to where I'm living, which is in the upstate Hudson River Valley of New York City. And at the present moment, I am the only missionary living where they're moving to. And so I'm living here as kind of like the firewall to be here where they're moving to. And so that's why I'm living here.
Okay, just a quick this is kind of a two-part question, so to speak. In just a couple of minutes, explain to us why you're a missionary. I know the Lord called you. Why you're a missionary, and why do you have such passion for Jewish missions?
Well, that's an easy question.
Well, good.
Because we think about Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Moses, and they gave us the Hebrew scriptures, they gave us the Old Testament. They must have a personal, secret relationship with God. And on one aspect, they do, because of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, etc. But they have to get to heaven the same way we do, through a personal relationship with Jesus, because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one gets to the Father but by me. And Peter on the day of Pentecost said, there is no other way under heaven or earth. He didn't say it on the day of Pentecost, excuse me. He said it before the Sanhedrin. I want to get my verses right. There is no other way under heaven or earth that man might be saved except through Jesus. And so there is no other way. There is no secret dual covenant for salvation except through Jesus. And at this present moment, you can look at the Joshua Project and other mission surveys, and they all agree that 97 to 99% of all Jewish people in the world, so between 1% and 3%, only 1 to 3% of all Jewish people in the world are saved. That means that 97 to 99% of the people who gave us Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, Jesus, are lost and dying and going to hell at this very moment. That means that tonight is Passover. We're doing this on the first night of Passover, by the way. And they will sit down at Passover. They will do the elements of Passover, and they will see, if you've ever done a Passover, and Dennis and I've done Passovers at Dennis's churches. They will see Passover and they will not realize that Jesus is present at Passover.
Right.
And they will miss it. And they will get up from Passover, they will go on, and they will live, and they will die, and they will go to hell. And it is because, as my Baptist pastor daddy, he was a Southern Baptist, he was a BMA Baptist, he was an Independent Baptist, he was 3 different kinds of Baptists, by the way. He preached the entirety of Romans 1:16, and he preached also Romans 11:11, that it is our job as Gentiles to make the Jewish people jealous for Jesus. And he used to say, we've done a lousy job.
Well, and I think, again, looking at Passover, the Passover meal tonight, and that Passover ceremony, if you want to call it that, the whole concept of that is, I think one of the saddest things for me, 2 of the saddest things, is going to look for Elijah.
Yeah.
Not going to look for Jesus.
Yeah.
And then the very ending next year in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Understanding there is a need for the Messiah, but not knowing where to find him.
Exactly.
So anyway, now there are a lot of other groups out there that do Jewish missions, not just evangelism, but groups like Jews for Jesus, the Christian Jew Foundation, Chosen People Ministries. What is it about Tzedakah that you would say sets what you do apart from some of those other groups? And it's not saying that they don't do good things, they don't do work, but the distinctive concept, because Amy, you worked for one of those groups for some period of time, and so your understanding of what they do is not secondary. It's because you were involved in it. But what does Tzedakah do that you say, well, this is something that's a little bit distinctive? And I'll just say this: I've had some of those other groups in my church, and they come in, they do a great presentation. But the truth is, once they've done their presentation and shared, then they kind of go somewhere else, but that's the end of it.
Right.
And so tell me, what was Tzedakah does?
Well, I think it's based on our vision statement, our mission statement, to equip his church to reach his people. And that is primarily what we do. We don't want to just do our presentation and go on. And those other organizations, and I did work for one of those other organizations, and those other organizations do something that each of those other organizations do a facet of Jewish missions that one of the other organizations cannot do. We all have to work together to reach the Jewish people. And what I tell each church when I go to the churches is, I'm coming here, I'm sharing the vision of our ministry, but I don't want to just leave here and move on. And you go, wasn't she fun?
Yeah.
And then you forget about me. I want to leave a piece of myself here because, and I'm going to give you an example. I spoke, and it's an Oklahoma church. This church in Oklahoma, and it's Leedy, Oklahoma. And you know where Leedy is, Dennis. There is nothing in Leedy, Oklahoma, except, Dr. Pepper, which thank goodness for Dr. Pepper, and 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 pickup trucks, And this church in Leedy, Oklahoma began to pray that God would bring us a Jewish person so that we could witness to them. And I would go back to that church every year, and I would speak at this church, and I would seek to, Zadaka would seek to equip them to know how to witness to a Jewish person. And they would pray, God, bring us a Jewish person so we can share Jesus with them. And one Sunday, and I'll try to make this a quick story. One Sunday after church, the pastor and his wife took me to the one restaurant in town, and there was one. And by the way, this is the town I graduated high school from, and we had the biggest graduating class that they had had in years, all 20 of us. And so walked into the restaurant, and I had my Zadaka shirt on with the little logo on it, and the guy came to the door, and there was four of us because my mom was still alive and she was with me, and the guy looked at my shirt and he went, Shalom Aleichem. and and I went, Aleichem Shalom, which is how you say hello in Hebrew. And people that were there, and Mark and Jada, that's the pastor, and his wife, were like looking at me like, what's going on? And I looked at him, and mom just looked at Mark and said, he's Jewish. And and he took us to the table, and I said, where are you from? And he said, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And so turned out that, and I asked Mark, I said, who is he? He goes, well, that's the restaurant owner's new husband.
Hmm.
And long story short, she had moved to Tennessee. The restaurant owners had moved to Tennessee, married this guy, brought him back to Oklahoma, Jewish guy.
Well, let me
Oh,
let me ask you a question. I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah,
I already know the answer. As you travel,
yeah,
where do you find Jews?
everywhere.
We sometimes tend to think of things like New York City, again, Dallas, Houston, big metro. But the truth is, anywhere you go. Now, the other side of that coin is they may not have a shirt on that says, hey, I'm Jewish, but you've been in some places and found even Jewish cemeteries or
Yeah.
graves that just help us to know, because some of the guys that are in the network are in really small rural areas, and they may think, well, there's absolutely no need for us to do this because we don't have any Jewish people living in our area.
I've been in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and found Jewish cemeteries.
Yes.
But I want to finish the story real quick.
Sorry to interrupt. That just came to mind.
That's because this is an important story.
Yes.
I talked to this guy all during lunch because he kept coming back because he was so excited to find somebody who could talk a little Yiddish to him, which is Hebrew German slang. And by the way, everybody at the town who was at that restaurant after church on Sunday, from the Methodists to the Pentecostals to the First Baptists, and everybody everywhere else in between was hearing me talk Yiddish, and thought, Brother Jack, that was my dad's name. She had done spoken tongues, by the way, and so, which I don't, and and so and so and so he was so excited. And during lunch, I said, I read Isaiah 53, 4-6 to him. And he goes, well, that sounds like Jesus, doesn't it? I said, it sure does. What are you going to do about it? And after lunch, as Mark and I and Jada and Mom and I were saying goodbye to him, now I said, Mark, I have to go to my next church, which was in Mustang, Oklahoma, which is closer to the city. And I said, it's your job now. What are you going to do? And he goes, well, we've got to share Jesus with them now because it's our job. You've equipped us.
Right.
We're going to have to go back to that restaurant now every Sunday until he gets saved. Long story short, he died a few months later, the restaurant owner's husband. But 3 months before he died,
Yeah.
he was saved and he was baptized and he went to heaven from Leedy, Oklahoma.
Yes. From eating lunch and
from eating lunch
in a Jewish shirt.
in a Jewish church.
Amen. Well, now, because a lot of what we do is specifically for just pastors.
Yeah.
And their churches. Again, as a pastor, I've been through every kind of evangelism training that's out there, from evangelism explosion to, master life, the 4 spiritual laws, the 1 verse evangelism, Roman road.
Yeah.
Why does a pastor need equipping on specifically Jewish evangelism?
What we do, if a pastor wants us to come to their church, and I would love to come to any church at any time, we have that wherever, whenever, however, anywhere kind of approach, is we give them some basic understanding of Jewish history, Jewish culture, Jewish understanding, and we give them some basic tools. But we don't do like the 4 spiritual laws or evangelism explosion, because it really is a relational experience with Jewish people. They have to know that you care, which involves Jewish history and Jewish culture and Jewish understanding.
Yeah.
You have to understand where they're coming from, which involves understanding that you care.
Well, and one of the questions, I think, and the answer is very simplistic, but just because, why would you go to Isaiah 53 and not John 3:16?
Because they've never read John 3:16.
Exactly. Yes.
By the way, they've never read Isaiah 53 either, but at least they know Isaiah 53 is in their book.
Right. We have to learn to be equipped to use the whole Bible to preach to the whole world. And so I think that's important. Now, here's what I know. I know you love Jesus, and know you love the Jewish people, but you have a bill, you have insurance, you have to eat. How do you fund? If somebody said, "Hey, I would love for you to come to Lamesa, Texas. I'd love for you to come to Stuttgart, Arkansas." How is the funding for Zadok in place?
We are a 501c3 ministry. We are supported by love offerings. We are supported by churches. We are supported by individuals. When we come to a church, we do ask for help with travel, as much help as a church can give. We don't have a set, you must give us X amount of money. We do ask for help with travel as much as a church can give. And we do ask for a love offering.
Okay.
We don't have a set offering amount or a set honorarium amount. We leave that to the church and to God.
And has the Lord taken
have
the Lord taken care of you?
Yes.
Yes. He always
sometimes we get a little nervous. Last month was a little nerve-wracking, but I'm not going to lie. But God has always provided.
Well, and just kind of as chasing a rabbit for a second, in that you have traveled extensively in what you do.
Yeah. Yes.
Just a short, quick itinerary, places you've been, things you've been allowed to do that somebody would go, wow. Not because you're impressive, but because God's impressive.
We've been to 31 states, and I've spoken 9 countries.
Okay.
Four continents, if you want to count the continents.
Sure. And some of those speaking engagements were not just local church kind of setting.
No, I've spoken conferences. Most of the countries have been conferences.
Okay. And
yeah,
Jewish conferences specifically on Jewish evangelism, or just Jewish history, or?
Well, I spoke in Japan at a conference, and I love talking about Japan If you give me like maybe 2 minutes to talk about the conference in Japan, uh, out of all the countries in the world, you would think about Japan, because if there's any country that is less evangelized than the Jewish people, it would be Japan. But the Christians in Japan have a huge heart for Jewish evangelism. And so they invited several different Jewish evangelism and Jewish mission organizations to speak in Japan. And so I was able to speak in Tokyo, Japan about 5 years ago. And I spoke on Jewish evangelism and what churches, Christians and churches in Japan need to do to be better equipped to reach Jewish backpackers and Israeli backpackers when they come to Japan searching for hope. Because a lot of people are surprised when they hear this statistic. 80% of all Israelis are atheists. And so when they travel the world, they're often searching for some sort of religious identity. And they often go to Japan searching and trying to discover if Buddhism or Shintoism is something they could explore further. So Japanese Christians are actually on the forefront of Jewish evangelism, even more than Americans.
Yeah. Well, and I know you've been to Europe.
Yes. I've been to Switzerland, Denmark, England, trying to think of the countries I've spoken in Europe: France, Switzerland, Denmark, and England.
Okay. Well, it is important for us, again, it's not bragging on you, but it means that when we start as pastors or individuals or churches looking for credibility in what we're going to invest in, the fact that God has allowed you to be a part of that does help us to understand.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to know more,
yes,
they want to understand, how can we support? How can we have you come? What kind of resources are out there? And I know you've written a lot, and you've done a lot of things. You have social media. Help us to know exactly what that would look like. And I will post all of this data or this information when we post this video, and a link to how to connect with you. But just kind of share with us a little bit of what that looks like.
Well, you can go to our website, and you'll probably have to, well, actually, I think my little name's the DpMinistries is right there at the bottom. But go to DpMinistries.org, and you can go to, I think it's called About Us or Church Resources, and you can contact us that way. Also, and this sounds strange, and our ministry resources are evangelistic tracts, our materials, and this is something my board always disagrees with me about, but I always win the argument. Our evangelistic tracts are always free, and the argument that I always present to the board is our salvation was free, so why should we charge for our evangelistic tracts and materials? And so we do not charge for our evangelistic tracts. And this is something that I think that it should be noted that we write all of our evangelistic tracts and materials, which means I write all of our evangelistic tracts and materials, because I want to make sure that I can stand behind our evangelistic tracts and materials.
Well, and I know that you're welcome. You'd welcome the opportunity to come to a church, to a group of churches or whatever.
Yeah.
Because many times I think what we focus on is simply Passover. If somebody says, my church, I want to focus on Passover, do a Seder presentation, those kinds of things. And matter of fact, you're doing one of those tomorrow night or Thursday night, or today's Wednesday.
Friday night. I'm doing one on Friday night.
And you've done those for us, and you've helped lead through some of those kinds of things. But way beyond that, is the concept and again the broadness of what Tzedakah does. And so
I've done evangelistic training, components, modules. I've taught churches on how the Holocaust has impacted Jewish people. And if you'll give me a couple of minutes, I'll talk about that, because people ask me, what are the two or three things that are stand in the way of Jewish people coming to Jesus? I tell them three things, the three things that stand in the way of Jewish people coming to faith in Jesus. One is their misunderstanding of the Trinity, because they don't understand how the Trinity is not polytheism or believing in three gods, which I can explain very easy, but it takes a couple of more minutes than I have here. The second thing is anti-Semitism, which obviously takes a long time. And the third thing is the Holocaust, and what they perceive as Christian involvement in the Holocaust. And I've had so many times when I've explained how what they perceive as Christian, not just Catholic, but when they hear Christians, they think all of us are Catholic. And I explain that as we're all just different flavors of the same potato chip. And they don't understand that there is Catholic, and then there are Pentecostals, Presbyterians, whatever. They just think we're all different flavors of the same Catholic potato chip.
And I would say,
go ahead.
You ask a Gentile about a Jewish person, we do the same thing.
We do. They just think that, all Jewish people are the same, and they are not. Trust me. In fact, I have 30 different types of tracks, because if you stick 7 Jewish people in a room, they'll have 12 different opinions. Yeah. And I'm not exaggerating. But and so explaining the Holocaust and how we can, as Christians, make restoration from the Holocaust as a way of dealing with the Holocaust. And I'm going to give you an illustration in just a moment, if you'll give me
Please. Yes.
a few minutes. That's a great way of sharing the gospel with Jewish people. And I'll give you the short version, the Reader's Digest version, in just a second. A few years ago, when I was living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I was at the Dallas Jewish Community Center, and I could get into the Dallas Jewish Community Center, even though they knew I was a Jewish evangelist, a Jewish missionary, and they knew what I did. And because when I went there, I went there very, in a sense, in the Christian sense of apologetic, not apologizing, but apologetic. And I was very respectful. But if they asked me a question, I would answer it. And I had these 2 Jewish women my age come up to me, and they said, "Why do Christians hate Jewish people?" That was their question to me. And I said, "Well, you asked me the question. I'm going to answer it." By the way, I was praying to Jesus in my head the whole time. And I said, the first thing I need to answer is tell you is I am sorry for Christian hatred towards Jewish people. I am sorry for the Crusades. I am sorry for the Inquisition. I am sorry for the pogroms, the Russian hatred towards the Jewish people. And most of all, I am sorry for the Holocaust, because they could not separate what was done by the Catholic Church from the fact that I'm Baptist. They couldn't separate that. And I said, "But I want to tell you about my Jesus. My Jesus. My Jesus was born Jewish. He was circumcised the 8th day, according to Luke chapter 2. His mother Mary, according to Luke chapter 2, went to the temple and did the offerings, the sacrifice with the 2 birds. And I had to, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, but I went through how Jesus was the most Jewish person you can imagine. He went to the temple when he was 12, which I believe was getting ready for his bar mitzvah. And he observed all of the Jewish holidays, and he died on Passover as the Passover lamb, and he arose as the feast of first fruits. By the way, Jewish people don't celebrate the feast of first fruits anymore, which they didn't realize. And and Jesus ascended into heaven on the day of Shavuot, which is what we call Pentecost. And I went through all of it, and all of his disciples were Jewish, and Paul was Jewish, and that Paul decided to share the Jewish Messiah to the rest of the world. And I went through. It was a longer story than I shared with just now. And then I said, and thank you for giving Jesus to the rest of us. And they said, we've never heard Jesus described like you just described him to us. We never heard Jesus described that Jewish. And they were stunned.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is Dallas. You've got Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. You've got Dallas Seminary in Dallas. And you've got a gajillion churches everywhere. And they had never heard Jesus describe that Jewish. And they couldn't think that Jewish Christians hated Jewish people anymore after I explained them that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my question I share with churches often is, why have they never heard Jesus described that way? Because most Christians don't realize how Jewish Jesus is.
Yes. Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think sometimes I know historically, because I've been in a lot of churches. I've seen a lot of blonde-haired, blue-eyed paintings of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I do think we lose context, because when I think of I'm speaking at a Hispanic church in May for 2 Sundays, and I told the pastor, I said, look, brother, I don't speak Spanish. He said, don't worry about it. When you get to heaven, you will, because that's the language God speaks.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we lose context of the fact that our focus of the gospel is for folks like us. When I say like that, look like us, that speak like us, that have the cultural characteristics like us. And again, for me to reach into a different setting, it means I have to understand, like you said, the culture. I have to understand the history. And so, I would say that I would urge folks, especially pastors, to get in touch with you. We've got just a few minutes. Anything that I haven't touched on that you think that would be important for us to share or talk about? Or
Well, I think just to re-emphasize, if I could, that Tzedakah is a ministry of equipping churches and Christians to have a heart for Jewish people, to love Jewish people, to pray for Jewish people, and to realize that it's not just a one-off. Oh, we've done our Jewish thing for the year. Let's check it off. But to have a vision for Jewish evangelism that is a part of us, because once you know that Jewish people need Jesus, it will enrich your heart for Jewish people. And I don't want churches to become Jewish, because you're not Jewish. I'm not Jewish. And in fact, most Jewish people who are reached for the gospel are not reached by Jewish people. Jews for Jesus did a survey in the 70s where they discovered that 90% of all Jewish people reached for Jesus, are reached by non-Jewish people. They redid that survey about 10 years ago, and the percentage was only 80%. Most Jewish people reached for Jesus are reached by non-Jewish people. Churches don't have to become Jewish. We just have to be who we are. And the reason that is is because Jewish people need to see, as Romans 11:11 says, that they have to become jealous for what we have. We, as non-Jewish people, are the best witnesses of the gospel for Jewish people. There's other organizations, and this is the one criticism I have, that says we have to become more Jewish to become something. No, we just have to be evangelists for Jesus. And when we reach Jewish people, we will have the best evangelists for the whole world.
Sure.
We just have to be who we are, and then we can reach the whole world for the gospel.
And Amy, I know you would agree with me, because you've seen this and I've seen this, that sometimes the emphasis of some of the Jewish ministries have more to do with providing food and shelter and those kinds of things, rather than the heart of it is the gospel. Yes, we need to provide as we can, but I would rather you be hungry and die of starvation, but know Jesus, than to be well fed and warm and go to hell. Not that. So it's not that one's important and the other's not, but the fact is that the focus always has to be on the gospel and the use of ministries. So what would it take for somebody to say to you, hey, we want you to come to share with our church, our group? Again, just come to the website, contact you on your information, and just visit with you directly.
Email me, call me, invite me, and I'll be there.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing with us today. I'm excited. Listen, I've known Amy since probably sometime in the early 90s.
1992, Dennis.
1992, which is a long time ago. I had less of me and more hair in those days, but have followed with Amy. Was honored when she decided to come back to Texas from New York, that she called me and said, hey, this is where the Lord's leading me. I would love to have someone to kind of come along and help us as we kick this thing off. And so we've been a partner with her for many, many years in many ways. And so, I'm excited for her to be in New York City, but it's a long ways. My wife and I were in New York last year, and Amy was gracious and picked us up at the airport and showed us around, and we ate some wonderful Italian food.
Yeah.
But I would urge you guys, if you think this is a tool, let me say it this way. If you think this is a tool that you could use, but you understand it's a tool that you need, would love for you to connect with her. You can reach out to me as well. But it's been a joy, Amy, to have you today. I pray that in the days to come, what we've done here will be a means by which folks can connect with Tzedakah Ministries. And in the days to come, we'll see the Lord use you and continue to use you in the work of evangelism and ministry and equipping the church to reach his people. Tell me what that to reach.
To equip his church to reach his people.
Okay, I had it right. It didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. But, thank you. We love you. We're so thankful for the work you do. And
thank you, Dennis.
Sure, we pray this will be a great blessing. Guys, this is our session for Conversations for Pastors for this time. If we can help in any way, please let us know. Other resources are out there on the website, www.dennisparish.org, along with social media. Most of you know how to reach out to me. We'd love to connect you. We will see you next time for our next Conversation with Pastors. Bye, Amy.
Bye, Dennis. Thank you.